This is Far From Home. I'm Scott Gurian. If you ask me what my favorite part of being a reporter is, I'd have to say it's the fascinating and sometimes crazy experiences I get to have, since holding a microphone and wearing a press pass basically opens up all sorts of doors and gives me an excuse to do things that I might not have access to as an ordinary civilian. But if you asked me about my second favorite thing about my job, I think my answer would be getting to have conversations with some really interesting people. Over the years, I've met individuals from all walks of life and had the opportunity to learn about their backgrounds and really immerse myself in their worlds. The most memorable have been people who are completely different from me, having led extraordinary lives and done things I could never even dream of doing. I love interviewing folks who are super passionate about something and hearing what makes them tick, even if it's not something I feel strongly about myself. You know what I'm talking about if you heard my last episode about Gary Davis, the man who gave up his American nationality in 1948 and lived the next 60 years of his life as a citizen of the world. As I was putting that episode together, I started thinking back on another piece I produced many years ago about someone else who did some pretty amazing things while traveling the world. Longtime followers of my show might remember the story of Addi Somekh and his balloon hats, which seemed to be a listener favorite, so I thought I'd revisit that episode on today's show. If you haven't heard it, I don't want to give away any spoilers at this point, but suffice to say you're in for a treat. Hope you enjoy it. When he was growing up in Southern California, Addi Somekh wasn't quite sure what he wanted to do with his life, but he knew from a young age that he wanted to spread warmth and make other people happy. On this week's episode, the unusual story of how Addi's quest to do just that set him off on a worldwide mission to make people laugh.
All right. You let a little bit of air out because if it's too much air, then you're just asking for trouble. Okay, so when you make a balloon hat,
Addi Somekh is not your ordinary balloon hat maker. He's a pro.
I've just blown up a green balloon, which I'm going to attach to the black head base.
Now, in case you're starting to roll your eyes imagining a clown at a kid's birthday party, I should make it clear right off the bat that this is totally different. You see, Addi's hats are really like works of art. He improvises each one to match the personality of the recipient, and some people have even described them as natural extensions of their bodies.
So I would say the whole hat is maybe 3.5 feet tall, and it's made out of 4 balloons. But also I would say, as wacky as it is, I think it's kind of classy.
Addi got his start making balloon hats as a part-time job when he was in college. He admits that at first, even he himself had trouble taking his work seriously.
I thought, okay, this is cool, but it's also kind of lame at the same time. I thought that I was like a novelty act, and I thought that this was a substitute for my real dream, which was to play music.
He figured it was just a phase he was going through, but then he went back to school.
And I'd have homework, and I would just procrastinate by twisting balloons. And then eventually I had to admit to myself, like, I'm actually good at this.
As his skills improved, he also began to realize that his hats were quite meaningful to people.
I was making $150 an hour twisting balloons at corporate parties. And I was volunteering at homeless shelters for, like, abused wives and kids. At that point is when I realized that the super rich and the super poor were laughing at the same thing in the same way. That's when I began to have more respect for balloon twisting.
It was around this time that Addi met Charlie, an amateur photographer whose day job was redesigning people's closets.
And what happened was he had come over to my house once and there was a Halloween party. But to get into the party, you needed costumes, and we didn't have any. So I said, I make balloon hats.
So he made these hats for us. He whipped them out in a couple minutes.
That's Charlie Eckert.
We walked out of his apartment, and instantly somebody came up to us. She was just ecstatic and thanking us profoundly for making her night. And then on the subway, like, people were coming from other cars. And I grew up here, and I've never seen anything like this.
Charlie was born and raised in Queens, and he was like, you know what? You could be bleeding on the side of the road, and people would just walk right past you, you know? He had never seen people, like, go out of their way to express, like, that level of positivity before. And he thought, man, these balloons are kind of, like, they affect people in New York, I wonder what it'd be like if you took them other places.
Once the idea was planted in Addi's mind, he couldn't stop thinking about it. Charlie remembers what happened next.
I went home, went to sleep, and maybe like 4 or 5 hours later, my brother woke me up and he was like, this guy Addi's on the phone. He insists to talk to you now. It's really important. And so I answered the phone and said, what's up? He said, well, let's go do it. And I was like, do what? And he's like, let's go around the world and make people balloon hats. And I was like, yeah, okay, I'm down. Let's do it.
So at the age of 23, Addi withdrew his bar mitzvah money that had been sitting in the bank and took a trip with Charlie across Central America, carrying 50 pounds of balloons in his backpack. While Addi made hats for people, Charlie took hundreds of pictures to document their journey.
We went to the Caribbean coast of Nicaragua, and this was the first time that I ever got a sense that maybe what we were doing was bigger than what I had originally envisioned or planned. One of the elders in the indigenous community walked up and said, "Thank you so much for making these hats. These hats remind me of the hats I wore when we were children that were made out of feathers of birds that are no longer here. And these balloon hats are the closest thing that these kids has ever gotten to our traditional hats."
Charlie also realized pretty quickly that it seemed like they were onto something.
I had a feeling that the act of crafting something for somebody and of giving something to somebody, something custom made, was a powerful tool to use to meet people and to relate with people. I had no idea how powerful it really was. It was like a social accelerant. I mean, it just instantly got you deep into environments and cultures.
That first trip was so successful that over the next several years, Addi and Charlie embarked on half a dozen more journeys, ranging from a boat ride up the Brazilian Amazon to a trek across the frigid Mongolian desert. It was on one of their early trips that they had a chance encounter with a filmmaker named Andy Vermouth.
I met Addi and Charlie in an airport in Ghana. I'd gone there originally to kind of study West African music on my own, and I had a kind of itinerary up the coast and up into Senegal and Mali.
He remembers his initial skepticism.
I'd come to Africa to escape the United States, and here, staring me in the face in the currency exchange line, was the only other American in sight. I asked him what he was doing in the region, assuming that he was a doctor or something, doing a vaccination project maybe. And he looked at me and said, making balloon hats. I kind of rolled my eyes and said, is this a joke? Is this a Peace Corps sponsored thing? Did USAID sponsor this absurd idea? What was it? And he said, no. He and a photographer were going around the world and just giving people balloon hats. So I just wished him luck and kind of wanted to get away from them as fast as possible. And I dived into the crowd. Maybe a half an hour later, my cab driver brought me to a hotel. It was just a random hotel choice. And I saw these two guys from the airport on the porch at the hotel. And Charlie came up to me and said, "Hey, sorry for losing you at the airport. We kind of lost you there, but we got the last room here. There aren't any rooms left, so I asked the desk clerk if we could share the room with you." And I was just thinking, what? What is this? Maybe I should be looking for another hotel. Is there another one around here? So I said, well, let's have a drink, and could be cool. We'll see. And, struck it up with them right there, talked about what they were doing, and then ended up sleeping in the same bed that night, all three of us. And then that was it. 6 weeks later, I was still traveling with them.
It was a turn of events Andy said he never could have imagined.
I'd been working at an architecture firm, basically working on large shopping malls, and I'd really had enough of that and really wanted to see the other side of life. And when I went on this trip to Africa, it was a way to, really get back to more ancient culture and see what had changed and see what was the same. And the very least thing I expected was to start traveling and making balloons for people. I never liked balloons in the first place.
Charlie recalls one of the highlights from that African trip.
We had sort of rented or hired a car in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. We were trying to get to Timbuktu, and this car just kept overheating and breaking down. We finally made it into Mali, and the radiator cracked. So we were waiting around, and the car is going to take like 24 hours to fix. And so we said, you know what, let's just hop a little bus and see where we end up. So we had our big bags. We get to this one village that looks like it's in the Flintstones or something. It's just like all mud and just absolutely ancient. So the village is up on a hill, and we're like, Addi, you're going to have to go up. You got to go in, make hats, and we're going to keep a lookout for you. But it's probably better that we don't all go at once, because there's like a really crazy little narrow path to get up there. And if we weren't welcome, it would be easier for one person to get out with just his balloons than it would be for 3 people with 2 backpacks each. So he goes up, and he's gone for like 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And around 20 minutes, I'm starting to get a little nervous, because there hasn't even been any kids running down with hats to come get us. And that would usually be the case. Somebody would always come and get us. And then all of a sudden, I started seeing all these people at the top of the hill just banging these wood things, And I was like, oh, this is it. He did something really offensive, and I don't know what we're going to do now. So we just kind of charged up there and put all our gear, and we're like, well, we got to get him. And anyway, they were all women, and they were beating like rice or something. But it just looked so much more violent from down low than like a food-making process. And so we get up there, and then the women just point to this one hut, and there's Addi sitting in the middle with like every single man from this town in this dark hut, and he's just whipping out hats, and the light's trickling in through these windows, and little kids are climbing up trying to look in the windows. It was just a really beautiful moment.
Later in their journey, Charlie took this amazing photo of an African couple standing on a dusty Kenyan road, proudly sporting their newly acquired crowns.
The headdress for them was a really important cultural symbol. So when we showed up to a town and we just busted out the balloons and started making balloon hats, we were taken right away to the chief, and we'd have to make the chief a balloon hat, and then his wives, and then his children, and then the regular people. It wasn't just like a fun novelty. It was like a serious sign of respect, which really kind of blew me away. I didn't really ever think about it like that.
Andy remembers his initial surprise.
When I first heard about it, I thought it was, another one of those slacker American coffee table book trips. People were doing this a lot then, going around the world and getting their own perspective on things with some little gimmick. And I thought this was just another one of those ideas. But when I first saw the reaction, I was blown away.
After Africa, they went to the Balkans just as things were heating up, 1 year before the NATO bombing.
Every time I'd start a trip with them, I'd have this incredible skepticism about, the whole nature of the project. Sarajevo was so damaged. It was completely destroyed. I thought, how is anyone here going to want to laugh or have fun or do anything outside just trying to get through the day and survive? We went to survey some refugees of the Srebrenica massacre, and I thought, this is really not respectful of their plight, and I was proved wrong. People loved it, These people didn't have any possessions that they were able to bring with them after this massacre. And just the very fact that Charlie could take these photos of them and give them back something, a family photo that they didn't have before, that they'd lost, or even just a memory of something happy, that had happened recently for them to think back on, was a really profound experience. And those kind of experiences just kept happening. When we were there, one of our hosts was a broadcast journalist for a TV station called Studio B, which is kind of the alternate TV network in Belgrade. And they did a little short spot on the Balloon Hat project and showed it on the air shortly after we left. But then during the bombing, they also aired this segment. And they thought that was very important and meaningful because it showed to Belgraders that not all Americans were against them, and that Americans as individuals weren't bombing them. You know, it was a government-to-government thing, and on an individual level, there were still friendships.
Through the images he captured, Charlie tried his best to change people's perceptions and spread a message of peace.
We went to Belfast and we photographed like Catholics one day and Protestants the other day. And here's 3 separate photos of them wearing balloon hats. Now you put the photos next to each other. It's like who's who. And it sort of was a way to just bring emphasis to the absurdity of it all.
Then Andy says they took a trip to the Middle East.
When we went to Jerusalem, we actually hit it on a holiday, Shavuot, the commemoration of the giving of the laws to Moses, where they make these paper hats for the kids. So we were actually invited to a Hasidic school in Mia Sharim, where, you know, we never would have been able to go any other day, and make hats for these Hasidic kids, and actually, you know, interacted with them. And then from there, the next day, going over to Ramallah, we had a little trepidation about it because Addi is Israeli. His parents are both Israeli. He was born in America, but he'd been to Israel many times with his family, and they forbade him from going to Ramallah or anywhere in the West Bank. So he basically had to lie to them and tell them he was going somewhere else, and then we went into Ramallah and, again, proved all of the expectations wrong.
I actually spoke Hebrew with Palestinians on the streets of Ramallah, just making balloons for their kids on the street. They'd come out with coffee for us, and one guy came up and put his arm around me and said, "You see this? An American speaking Hebrew in Ramallah. This is beautiful."
So nice.
More of Addi Somekh's incredible journey after this. If you're enjoying this episode of Far From Home, I want to take a quick moment here to recommend another podcast that I think some of you might like. It's called The Europeans, and each week Dominic, Katie, and the rest of their crew break down the latest news as well as updates on politics and culture from around the European continent. It's one of the shows that's always in my podcast queue, and I've learned about tons of fascinating stories that haven't gotten much attention where I am on the American side of the Atlantic. Plus, it's produced by a team in Paris, Warsaw, and Amsterdam, so you're sure to hear lots of local insights and different perspectives. Check out The Europeans wherever you get your podcasts. Everywhere Addi, Charlie, and Andy went, people offered them food and places to spend the night. Sometimes they used translators, but often they just let the balloons speak for themselves. They visited Thailand, Russia, and Scandinavia, took a train across China, and rode by camel through India's Rajasthan desert.
I remember one time we had like a crowd of like 40 kids, and they were all surrounding us, you know, and they were balloon hats, we all want to have one. And all of a sudden, these 3 police officers just like started separating all the kids and walked up right to us, and I thought, oh, we're busted now, you know? And they're like, we want hats too. It was just like, it was great. No one ever said no to a balloon hat in India.
And those hats gave them an amazing ability to connect with people all over the world in remarkable ways.
We were in Vietnam, up in the mountains where the Hmong people are, in this town called Sapa. And this anthropologist saw what we were doing, and he said, you know, you guys have gotten more into this culture in one afternoon than I have in 6 months, just because you made people laugh.
Looking back on his adventures, Addi says his experiences were really meaningful, and he doesn't have any regrets.
We were doing our travels from 96 to 99, which is the peak of the whole .com drunken craze. And I had a master's degree in organizational development, which I could have gotten a startup and made a ton of money in stock options and been smart enough to quit while I was ahead. And I grew up in the Silicon Valley. Every idiot I went to high school with was doing that. And we were making balloon hats for Africans for free, losing money. So it was a concerted effort to say, we want to do this. This is our chance to actually contribute something that makes someone feel better.
In addition to his international journeys, Addi also traveled extensively across the U.S., stopping to make hats for shrimpers in Louisiana, Native Americans in South Dakota, and even a senior citizens aerobics class in Miami. After hearing so many of his stories, I really wanted to see for myself how people would react to his hats. So the two of us went walking around Washington, D.C.'s Georgetown neighborhood.
Would you like a balloon hat?
Not really.
Do you want a balloon hat?
A what?
A balloon hat? I'm a balloon hat maker, and I just make them for free.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
For some reason, we just didn't seem to have much luck, but Addi understood the problem. All the amateur balloon hat makers had scared folks away.
Most people, when they make a balloon hat, it's not really like a well-crafted thing. It's like a bowl of spaghetti dumped on someone's head, you know? For me, as a balloon hat maker, part of the whole pitch is to somehow let people know that I'm not trying to goof on them. They're not going to be seen as foolish.
We figured that if we could just convince one person to wear a hat, the momentum would suddenly change, and soon everyone would want one. We decided to try our luck in a very different neighborhood, the poorer and less touristy southeast part of the city. As we approached a group of people waiting at a bus stop, they eyed us suspiciously, aware that we were from somewhere else. But after Addi described what he was doing, it wasn't long before he attracted quite a crowd.
Watch this right here. This is what got me. Look at it.
Yeah, like that, yeah.
Oh, man.
He bad.
That is something. I want me a hat.
Suddenly, grown men were clamoring around him, putting in requests for themselves, their wives, and their kids. One guy even asked for a hat for his probation officer.
That one's called the High-Low Rider. It's made with the Instant Classic head base. It's got some black, a curly on top, some ballies, and a dinghy in orange.
Thank you. I am so impressed.
You get a real high when you make people happy.
So
You know,
sweet.
because if you make something that makes someone else happy, that happiness bounces off them back to you. And then all of a sudden there's two people that are really happy.
After making hats in 34 states and 34 countries, Addi told me that traveling eventually took its toll on him. The rhythm he'd developed of meeting people and then leaving a few moments later had affected his non-balloon relationships with women. And he said he's spent so much time around children that he can't imagine ever having kids of his own. He doesn't travel as much anymore. Nowadays, he lives in Los Angeles, and in the years since I originally interviewed him for this story, he's managed to turn his skills into a successful business showing off his work, and he's appeared everywhere from The Today Show to Jay Leno and Martha Stewart.
Addi Somekh is here, and he's mesmerizing us with his balloon technique. What's next?
Check this out. This is the dinghy.
Uh-oh. Oh, I like this one.
Yeah, once you practice
I
a
like
lot, you sit in
that.
your room, lock the door, and practice for years.
Did your mother ask you, what the hell are you doing in your room?
They were a little concerned at first, yeah. In fact, they still sometimes are concerned, to be honest with you.
People hire Addi and his team for parties and events to build balloon art displays like enormous dancing robots and balloon dragons the size of a room. Last month, he even built a gigantic balloon dog as part of a set for Katy Perry's appearance on The Ellen Show. And a few years ago, he finally got his wish to have his own balloon TV program.
We were hired for a hospital fundraiser at a golf course in Marin County, California, which is just north of San Francisco. This one's actually a real challenge.
So what are we making?
I started brainstorming with her on the phone, and I said, hey, we can make a gigantic castle.
A castle?
A castle.
How big a castle did you promise?
I'd said it was going to be majestic.
Addi's also found a way to combine his love of balloons with his childhood dream of being in a jazz band.
I learned how to make a balloon bass from a really gifted balloon guy in Canada. He came up with this really clever way to make a balloon resonator inside of a round balloon, and you use a skinny balloon as the string that you play. So it's a one-string instrument.
All my hang-ups about playing music were erased because I figured it's a balloon. You know, I could do it if it's a balloon.
You can find Addi jamming on the balloon bass around the LA area from time to time as part of his music group called Unpoppable. In his free time, he's also started a group called the Balloon Art Brigade that teaches high school and college kids to twist balloons for people in homeless shelters and nursing homes. After nearly 3 decades, what started out as a part-time hobby seems to have taken over Addi's life, and he's just as stunned as everyone else.
I thought, okay, I'm going to do this for a couple of years, become like a regular person, job, wife, traffic in the morning, like everything my parents want for me. And I still haven't been able to get out of the balloon thing.
Charlie went on to become a freelance photojournalist covering everything from natural disasters to the war in Afghanistan. And Andy ended up making a documentary film about Addi's worldwide travels called, appropriately enough, Balloon Hat. You could find links to everything, the film, Addi's music, his TV shows, and even a TED Talk he gave on my website, farfromhomepodcast.org. And I know you're dying to see photos of his hats, so I posted a few of my favorites. You could also see them by following Far From Home on Instagram and Blue Sky. Shorter versions of the story originally aired on public radio ages ago, thanks to my editors Margot Melnikov at The World, Andrea De Leon at NPR, and Lita Hartman at The World Vision Report, who all contributed to making this a better piece. Thanks also to Kevin McLeod for his music track Investigations, to Hank Rosenfeld and Lona Elias for production assistance, to Dante Johnson, and to my friend Josh Chaffin, who introduced me to Addi in the first place. Until next time, I'm Scott Gurian. Thanks for listening.